Hello guys, this is your friend Naruto Addict 2.0. We are back with a new fanfic. Which is What If Godlike Naruto Got Massive Harem Part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic, then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. Naruto sat before the Hokage, his mind full of information and unanswered questions at the moment to even think. He looked to his left at the dog and his master, looking back at him with a bit of skepticism and confusion. Behind him stood the bug user, his face blank but other signals showing his confusion. And to his right stood the shy girl, her light violet pupil-less eyes filled with concern and hope as they looked from Naruto to the Hokage. The Hokage sat back in her seat holding her head as her mind burned with the information she had just received and her mouth just burned for the taste of sake as the streets outside filled with villagers and ninja alike all raging and scared, asking for an answer from their beloved Hokage. This arguably had to be one of the most confusing and hardest days of his whole career. To think this all started with a simple dream. Naruto began to stir underneath the covers of his bed, and before he knew it his eyes had opened to the world around him. However, this world wasn't the one he was oh so familiar with. This world was dark with a single light beside his head. What time is it? He thought to himself, expecting no one to answer his own thoughts, except maybe that damn fox. He turned his head to look at the clock by his bed. It read 5:34 a.m. Oh son of a, he muttered in his mind, curling up attempting to return to the land of dreams, but it was no use. Not that it would have aided him anyway. For the last few weeks he had been having very odd dreams, most of them dealing with the demon fox residing in his stomach. Why he had just woken up from a particularly odd dream where Kyuubi had, well, he didn't quite remember, but it was odd to say the least. He groaned and rolled out of bed, landing on his feet and deciding to take a small stroll to clear his mind and hopefully get back to sleep. He exited through his bedroom window and jumped down with ninja grace to the city streets, taking to a brisk walking pace to hopefully get this cleansing of his soul through with before the villagers awoke in the early morn. He sighed as he thought back to what had happened recently. He had come back to Konoha after a 2.5-year-long leave with the Arrow Sennin, Jiraiya, only to be ordered on a mission to save the Kazekage, Gaara. Needless to say, he had succeeded and returned to Konoha only to begin getting these weird bouts of pain in his stomach along with his warped dreams. He shook his head and a thought struck his head that it was a tad bit warm out that night, but he quickly dismissed it. Konoha could have some weird weather now and again, couldn't it? He looked around and noted something else odd. The buildings seemed to have grown since yesterday, but he decided to chalk it up to him being so tired. It was 5:30 in the fricking morning, he was damn entitled to some hallucinations. He felt as if the gods hated him now because, even at 5:30 in the morning, he heard the door to a shop open and people began to walk out. He groaned to himself as he saw them out of the corner of his eye stare at him, but for some reason he didn't feel hate from this stare. Well, not as much. But this stare held surprise, and even more so great and terrible fear. Suddenly the villagers took off in a brisk run, leaving Naruto even more confused. He shook his head and decided to think about more pleasant things, hopefully ridding him of this damned insomnia and allowing him a moment's peace in the process. His mind turned to who he had seen again on his return to Konoha. He had seen Konohamaru and his core once again, but more so he had seen Sakura again in what had seemed like ages. It was a reunion that only could be between a brother and sister. Then Kakashi came up and they had to have an almost full Team 7 reunion. Hell, they had even double teamed on Kakashi and beat him on the Bell's test thanks to Naruto's perverted knowledge. He found more of his friends hadn't changed much in the time he had been gone. In fact, they say he had changed the second most. He smiled and shook his head at his latest encounter. Team 8 had been a blast to see again. Shino was his same cold and collected self with almost silence, but Kiba and Akamaru. Akamaru apparently had the world's biggest growth spurt because he had changed from the dog that was forever perched upon Kiba's head to the dog who now carried Kiba on his back like he was a feather. He had to smile in spite of himself at when he had seen Hinata. She plain stuttered to no end with that red blush of hers, then fainted in front of him. He was still confused as to why, but it certainly made an entertaining scene. His neck muscles seemed to twitch a bit when he thought of the deep red blush on her, but he once again chalked it up to being up so early. He sighed, comparing his friends to when he first saw them to how they looked and acted now, but that train of thought ended early when he made it to his apartment, completely missing the screams of the early morning villagers while he was lost in thought. Naruto yawned and jumped in through his window again, only to find the time had become 6:30. Wow, a whole hour. I must have lost track of time. Might as well go train, seeing as how I'm not getting back to sleep anytime soon. He thought before he realized he had to use the bathroom first. He yawned, causing his jaw to crack a bit. He rolled his neck and entered the bathroom to use the facilities. That's when he noticed the sink was a little too tall for him. Seriously, who the hell is screwing with my mind? Kakashi or someone must be putting on some sort of genjutsu just to piss me off this morning. He sighed and raised his hands to make a seal to release the jutsu, but no matter how many times he tried, the sink still stayed too tall for him to reach. Oh damn it, he thought as he jumped and put his hands on the sink. What the hell? I jumped but my feet are still on the ground, what is going? He thought, but stopped short as he looked in the mirror. Now he was correct, he hadn't left the ground when he jumped, nor had the sink suddenly grown shorter. He looked into the mirror with wide blue eyes, and the only thing that stared back at him was the face of a fox, its golden fur shining even with minuscule light of the waning light bulb, and its 3 golden tails swishing in the shadows behind him. Naruto moved his head right, and so did the fox. He moved his hand to wave in front of his face, and the fox did the same thing, waving a paw much like Naruto had. Naruto looked at his hands only to see padded fox's paws on the ends of his golden furred wrists. Naruto did the only thing he could think of. He took in a deep breath, and screamed until the world around him spun and he fell into unconsciousness. Naruto opened his eyes in a snap and recognized his surroundings in an instant. You damn fox! Naruto yelled to the darkness of his mind as he stormed along the corridor to Kyuubi's cage. What the hell did you do to me? Naruto ranted as he closed in on the cage, only to show one thing: the gates were open, and it looked like nothing was inside. Naruto on instinct fell back into his fight or flight reflexes. His muscles tensed, his eyes darted all around, his fur stood on end, and his heart began to speed. Kyuubi, get out here and face me like the demon you are. Naruto growled to the darkness, only to get nothing but the silence of the hall as a reply. Kid, came a sudden voice from all around his being. Naruto jumped to attention and spun, looking for any signs of life, but all that existed in this plane was himself and the darkness. Kyuubi. Naruto called, his voice full of confusion. Where the hell are you? Naruto sighed as he heard nothing for a long while, intent on leaving this place until, from the darkness of Kyuubi's cage came a wisp of red chakra and a weak growl. I hate you, you know that, was the weak snarl from inside the opened cage, as from the vast darkness crept a small and almost harmless-looking 5-tailed chibi kitsune. Naruto took a moment to stare at the mini beast before erupting into a fit of laughter so intense that it hurt his sides. Kyuubi. Naruto laughed. You're a fricking midget. Kyuubi growled at Naruto, but in his present state he couldn't do a single thing to stop the boy. After Naruto had calmed his laughing, he said with an interrogating look, time to start explaining a few things, starting with this. Naruto gestured to his foxish body with his 3 tails. Kyuubi sighed and turned his head away with a disgusted look. I hate you and that damned 4th Hokage. You and that bastard. Kyuubi growled in anger before he turned back to Naruto, his blood-red eyes the only thing threatening about him. I won't bullshit you, I tried to break the seal. Naruto's cerulean fox-like eyes shot open and then narrowed as a growl issued forth from his throat. You what? Naruto shouted with such rage that it caused Kyuubi to flinch a bit. Remember your little stomach pains, your odd dreams. I was working on my way out, but you. Kyuubi shouted as all his 5 tails pointed directly at Naruto, you and that damn seal. The fourth must have known I would try something like this. Kyuubi grumbled as he finished his statement. What are you rambling on about, or have the thousands of years of your life finally caught up with you? Naruto said mockingly. Kyuubi was really close to attacking the kid, just on the razor's edge, but he restrained himself and continued. The seal used what I had planned and backfired on me. You can see the result of my short-sightedness. Kyuubi sighed and hung his head in what looked like shame. What do you mean, backfired? Naruto asked, curiosity and a bit of amusement tinting his tone. I mean that when I chose my moment to release myself, the seal took my work and threw it in my face. When I was locked in here, I was torn into the 3 essential parts: mind, body, and soul. I still have my own mind and soul because that is impossible to transfer over to a human even with the seal and even harder to just dispose of. But my body. Kyuubi paused for a second looking at Naruto in all his golden glory. My body apparently has been transferred to you, along with all of its chakra and powers. I can now safely say, congratulations you lucky fricking bastard. Naruto was dumbstruck for a moment until he said, even though my brain is a bit fried at what you just told me, 1. How the hell are you still here? 2. Why haven't you tried to escape or take over? And 3. If you're the 9-tailed fox and I have your body, why do I only have 3 and why do you only have 5? Kyuubi sighed and said in an eerily sedated tone, 1. This is my mind and soul projected to you due to the seal, enough said. 2. If I were to escape, I would only be a mind and soul with no body, hence I would be technically dead and it would be utterly impossible for me to attempt a takeover of your body without my own power. Finally 3. What makes any being? It is a strict balance between body, soul, and mind. You only have the power of a 3-tailed fox, ergo that is what you are given. Why I'm only a 5-tail? Well, let's just say it would break your mind with complexity. On another somewhat related note, once you were given my body, the seal that old pervert and the other silver-haired pervert placed on you was broken. Naruto's head spun with this new information before he questioned with worry, I have your body, but what about my human side? Kyuubi chuckled a bit at Naruto's worry and said, your human, or should I say blended, side is intact and it will be easily accessible when you can successfully transform. However, only a fox of 5 or more tails can transform into a true half-human-like physique, not just a false image or henge as you humans call it. So, I'm stuck as a fox? Naruto shouted, causing Kyuubi to wince. I should ask you why the sheer volume of your voice doesn't pop your own eardrums. Kyuubi muttered to himself until he answered Naruto with, yes, you are stuck as a fox until you can successfully prove yourself as a 5-tail. Normally that would take hundreds of years of training the body and mind, but with my body having already exceeded to a 9-tail, all you need is your mind to gain strength. Kyuubi smirked as he added, in other words, you are completely screwed. Naruto growled at Kyuubi and said, if I had the time I'd beat the hell out of you, but as it is I'm going to need to see Oba-chan as soon as possible. Naruto concentrated and found himself slowly drifting from the world of the seal to the real world. Kid, keep in mind this body is overall more powerful than your original one, and when you get the time I might be inclined to teach you how it works. With those parting words from the demonic fox, Naruto awoke in his home, on the floor of his less than clean bathroom. Okay, first thing to do, use the toilet, then it's off to see Oba-chan. Naruto quickly did his business with minimal troubles and took off for the Hokage Tower. However, just as he had stuck his head outside of his front door, he looked down upon the street and saw what seemed to be an endless mob at the base of his apartment building, all screaming and hollering for the death of the demon fox. Naruto quickly and quietly crept back into his apartment, swiftly locking the doors with his tails and making a break for his bedroom window. Thank the gods I live on the 2nd floor. He thought to himself just as he reached his bedroom, only to be intercepted by 2 ninja who had snuck into his home through his open window. Crap, crap, crap. Kyuubi. What the hell do I do? Naruto shouted in his mind as he was slowly cornered. What the hell do you think, kid? Fight. Kyuubi shouted from his subconscious, spurring the fox boy to do the one thing that came naturally in this situation, stand his ground then charge like mad. What surprised him the most was, the second he took a step forwards both ninjas backed up, fear glowing in their eyes. He smirked to himself as he charged, causing the ninjas to panic and sent them on their way as they clumsily stumbled out his window. This will be the first and only time I will thank you for your reputation to precede you, you damn fox. Naruto said to Kyuubi in his mind as he dashed out the window and into the world. There he is. Erupted a scream from the mob as they watched the golden fox leap from the second-story window. Get him! Came another unanimous shout as roughly 3/4 of the occupants of Konoha chased after the golden fox. Gotta hide! Gotta hide! Gotta hide! Naruto yelled in his mind as he valiantly kept a good lead in front of the raging mob. Why, kid, you could easily decimate them even before you had my body. Kyuubi shouted from the back of his mind, but with his new higher-pitched voice it didn't sound nearly as threatening. I'm not going to hurt them. They may deserve it, but I can't. I need to hide. Naruto screamed back just as he saw his possible salvation in the valley of the next hill. 5 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the fricking morning. Who the hell gives missions at 5 o'clock in the morning? Shouted the enraged ninja as his enormous pet dog walked along beside him. Kiba was the ninja's name and he walked ahead of his group with his arms crossed. Kiba-kun. Came a timid voice from the female of the team, her pale violet eyes fixed to the ground a few paces ahead of her steps. It was a last minute mission to the Hokage-sama. We had to take it. She stuttered lightly, hoping to get her teammate calmed down. Well, at least as calm as he usually is. Ever hear the expression, let sleeping dogs lie? He groaned as he looked at his other teammate. Shino, what time do you have? He asked as the silent boy replied with a curt, 7 o'clock, great, we wasted 2 hours on that dumb mission, I'm out of here. What the hell is that? Kiba was cut short as, in the blink of an eye, a golden flash ran right past them, then out of sight as a massive mob chased after the golden streak. All three blinked confused, but Kiba was the only one to say something. What the hell? Come on, let's go see what's up. Kiba hopped on Akamaru and began to lead the way, followed quickly by the insect user Shino, but the female of the group made no indication of moving. Noticing this, Kiba asked, Hinata, what's the matter? We gotta hurry if we want to see what they were after. Hinata merely looked down and blinked a few times before completely registering what she was seeing. Around her ankles was a shaking ball of golden fur, its bright blue eyes watching the mob intently as they left chasing nothing. Kiba then noticed the ball of fuzz with a bit of confusion. Hadn't they just seen this thing run by them a moment ago? Hinata, shake that thing off quick. Kiba said as he dismounted Akamaru and the pair readied to attack. Suddenly the ball of fuzz cried out with short barks and yips, the feeling behind them being pure desperation. Hinata blinked confused and the bug wielder Shino waited, his bugs at the ready just in case the thing dared to attack. Kiba and Akamaru sat wide-eyed as the creature spoke its tail, and when it finished with a few short yips it slowly disengaged itself from Hinata's legs and looked up at her, hope in its azure eyes. Kiba sighed and looked at Akamaru, who looked back to his master, and with a few short barks Kiba nodded. Gather the fox, we have to get to the Hokage. Kiba and Akamaru began walking, followed by Shino. Hinata blinked, then looked down to the fox who, in his quick sprint from the murderous mob, had used up a great deal of energy and was having a hard time walking. She smiled slightly and picked the golden fox up, its size and weight not too much of a problem for her ninja training. I'm not sure what's going on, but let's go, Kitsune-kun, she said quietly as she followed her teammates in the direction of the Hokage Tower, avoiding any and all mobs along the way. Hey, we're here to see the Hokage. Kiba said to the intern at the desk of ninja relations to the Hokage. Do you have an appointment? asked the intern, her voice clearly uninterested in whatever was happening with these 3 ninja and 2 canines for them to so urgently need to see the Hokage. Well, no, but. Kiba began, but the intern cut in saying, sorry, no appointment, no seeing the Hokage. Kiba twitched a few times in anger. Shino silently glared at the intern, and Hinata looked at the kitsune in her arms with worry because she felt the ball of fur begin to shiver. Kiba was about to begin shouting, but suddenly the kitsune in Hinata's arms decided enough was enough and he broke free of Hinata's grasp, making a mad dash for the door. The 2 Anbu guards assigned to protect the Hokage went on high alert, and when they saw who, or what it was that was on its way to see the Hokage, they went on an even higher level of awareness, preparing for anything. The Anbu began to draw their blades and the golden fox stopped in its path. It growled loudly and started a charge, but stopped as the doors to the Hokage office were suddenly thrown open and out stepped the Hokage, her face full of fatigue from many sleepless nights. However, there was a wide smile on her face and she stretched her hands far above her head. Finally, all that damn paperwork done and, Tsunade blinked a few times to register the sight before her until she threw her hands down to her sides and closed her eyes. Shit. Tsunade yelled in frustration as she saw the golden 3-tailed fox sitting before her, its ears drawn back as its ocean blue eyes were trained on the Anbu outlines indented in the walls. Tsunade looked from the golden fox at her feet to the 3 ninja and 1 giant dog rushing to the aid of the small canine. I really need a drink. Tsunade said as she walked into her office, sitting down in her chair and awaiting any and all explanations as to what the hell was going on. Tsunade sat with her head in her hands as the 3 ninjas and 2 canines walked in. It had been days since she had a full night's rest and this was the last thing she needed. I need a damn drink. Badly. Hokage-sama. Came 3 voices from the group before her and 4 of the visitors bowed in respect. The only one not bowing was the golden fox that sat with such a sense of self that it vaguely reminded her of someone. Yeah, Hokage, this and that, what's with the fox? We found Kitsune-kun are running from AM mob. The normally shy girl answered. Tsunade raised her eyebrow and was about to comment until Kiba spoke up, drowning out all other voices. Naruto asked us to come. Everyone in the room save for Akamaru and Kiba turned and stared blankly at Kiba, a clear indication they though he had gone insane. But Kiba-kun. We haven't seen Naruto K-kun all day. Hinata said with confusion thick in her stuttering voice. Kiba sighed and pointed right at the golden fox. Yes, you have, Hinata. He's sitting right there. All of a sudden all the eyes in the room turned to the fox, who looked very sheepish. I didn't believe it at first, but then it asked Akamaru and I to bring it here to plead its case. It said you would understand. Kiba finished as Akamaru barked in agreement. Tsunade looked at the fox stunned, and Naruto. The fox turned to her and nodded a little uneasily. This was the first time he had come close to revealing what he had carried all these years to people his own age. Hinata sat next to Naruto, her face beet red as she thought of the way she carried the fox from where they had found it to the Hokage's office now. Naruto-kun, she thought, what happened to you? Okay, can you just give me a moment, alone with Naruto? Tsunade said and everyone began to move, but suddenly Naruto began to bark and yip and Kiba nodded, staying back along with Akamaru. When Shino and Hinata had left, Akamaru closed the doors and Kiba relayed the message to Tsunade. He said that he can't talk or transform yet, he needs me to speak for him. Kiba announced as Tsunade nodded before turning to Naruto. Naruto, you know that if this is you are going to have to tell them about your tenant. Tsunade said with a deathly serious tone as her eyes closed in sympathy for the young fox boy. Naruto hung his golden head and looked at Kiba and Akamaru from the corner of his eye. He yipped a few things that Kiba translated into, he wants to ask if it can be Akamaru and myself that know what is going on first. To gauge a reaction. Hokage-sama, I don't know what is going on, but I get this feeling like this is very big. Tsunade sighed and nodded to Naruto. He looked at Kiba and Akamaru briefly before yipping a few things. He's asking if you'll tell us. What is going on, Hokage-sama? Kiba said as Naruto huddled himself further into his chair as if in fear of what was to come next. Ignoring Kiba's question, Tsunade looked to Naruto and said, "No, I can't, Naruto, you have to tell him yourself or not at all." Naruto raised his tears-soaked eyes from his mass of golden fur and looked from Tsunade's compassionate face to Kiba's confused gaze and realized that there was no easy way out of this one. Naruto slowly let out a short series of yips that translated to, "Kiba, do you know what happened 15 years ago when the Kyuubi attacked Konoha?" Kiba nodded and said, "They say the fourth Hokage defeated the demon but sacrificed his life to do it. Why?" Naruto looked at Akamaru and back to Kiba saying, "Well, it was only the half-truth. The truth is, the fourth didn't have enough power to kill the demon, so he sealed it." Naruto paused his story until he was brought out of his daze by Kiba with the words, "And what did he seal it into?" Naruto sighed and turned his head away back into his thick fur coat, his voice muffled as he yipped, "Me. Gods, let this death be quick. Damn it, with Kyuubi's body I might be able to live even if he beats me to near death." Naruto thought as he huddled closer into a ball, hearing footsteps come closer to him. Naruto. He could hear Kiba's voice, "Oh gods, is he going to taunt and curse him as he kills him? Why the hell are you trying to shove your head up your own?" Naruto blinked a few times in his furry ball until he slowly unraveled himself and looked up into Kiba's confused face. "Why? You don't hate me?" Naruto asked in barks and yips. "The only reason I have to hate you is that you beat me in the first Chunin exams with a fart. As far as I care, you and the demon fox are two separate things. You just got stuck with the short end of the stick having it sealed in you." Kiba said as Akamaru voiced his agreement with his barks. Naruto was so relieved he began to cry, causing him to let out loud and almost painful-sounding yelps. This caused Hinata and Shino to come rushing back into the room. "What happened?" Shino questioned his bugs and himself on high alert. "Oh, nothing. Naruto just told us oomph." Kiba stopped as something big and fluffy was stuffed into his mouth. He looked at the culprit and found Naruto, his eyes wet and his fox head shaking a definite no. "It's nothing, you two just go wait out in the hall until we call you back in," Tsunade said with a slight smile. Shino left easily, but Hinata was a bit more weary at leaving the four alone. She eventually was ushered out of the room and the doors were closed once again. "Bleg," Kiba said as he yanked Naruto's tail out of his mouth. "Naruto, you ever hear of a bath? It won't kill you." Naruto ignored Kiba's griping and began his tale while Kiba took up translating. He went from his odd dreams, to his midnight walk, to his meeting with Kyuubi, right down to when he ran into Kiba, Hinata, and Shino. By the end of the story, Tsunade, Kiba, even Akamaru were all wide-eyed and a bit confused. "So, is Kyuubi dead?" Kiba asked in confusion. "Technically, but as long as he's inside me he can be considered living," Naruto responded, which Kiba relayed to the Hokage. "Can Kyuubi ever escape?" Tsunade asked somewhat afraid. "Only if I let him, and even then I have to have molded him a body of chakra which I can take back any second." Naruto yipped, sending the message through Kiba. "What about you? Will you ever be semi-human again, or is this permanent? New powers? Anything cool? Come on, throw us a bone here," Kiba said, tapping his foot on the ground impatiently. Naruto twitched a bit and said with a series of long and slow yips, "I already said, when I get my fifth tail I will be free to move between my human and blended side anytime I want. As far as powers go, Kyuubi said this is a much stronger body than my last one, but it might take some time to get used to. If he wants to live he kind of has to give me lessons on it, so I'll be back to my normal self in no time." Kiba said this message as carefully as Naruto did, but the second Tsunade heard it she flipped. "No. I can't let you take lessons from a demon. What if he tries to kill you?" Naruto stood up and yipped even louder than Tsunade's yells. "Look, he can't take me over. He's only a mind and soul with no power behind him. He can't take over even if he tries, and if he does I can break the seal and poof, he's dead forever. Kiba calmed Tsunade down and explained what Naruto had just said, causing Tsunade to feel a little bit more safe, but it still left her with a heavy heart. Tsunade sighed and said, "Okay, bring the other two back in here and send Naruto out." Naruto hopped from his chair and exited, looking at Akamaru on the way out and bowing slightly, causing the big dog to smile a bit. As Naruto exited, Shino entered, followed by Hinata. Shino just walked into the office, but Hinata paused and looked down at Naruto, who at the same time looked up. Their eyes met and Hinata suddenly felt heat rise into her cheeks and her heart begin to speed. Naruto watched her pale eyes dart anywhere but him and her cheeks burn with a deep red blush, and he suddenly found the floor very interesting. He walked quickly to a chair against the wall of the hall. What was that about? I guess I shouldn't have had that expired ramen last night. He thought as he took a seat and waited, keeping a sharp eye on the Anbu guards. Okay, this is what it boils down to. Tsunade addressed the 3 ninja and 1 ninja dog in her presence. As far as I can tell, that fox is indeed Naruto for one reason or another. Tsunade glared to Kiba, silently telling him to keep his big mouth shut. Kiba obeyed and Tsunade continued, "However, Naruto won't be able to live like a normal human until we find some way to change him back, so it leaves me at this." At this point Tsunade looked around the room and said with a sigh, "One of you 3 is taking the fox home." "I'll do it," came a stuttering voice from one of the 3. All eyes turned on the blushing Hinata and she elaborated, I don't mind, and no one would think to find Naruto K-kun at the Hyuga C compound." Tsunade couldn't help but smile to herself. She knew the young heiress had what could easily be the world's biggest crush on what could easily be the world's thickest skulled person. She was a sucker for romantic stories, but when it came down to business there wasn't any room for it. "I'm sorry Hinata, but we can't. For one, your father would have a fit if he found out what, or rather who, was his daughter's new pet. 2, you can't understand what Naruto is saying, yipping. So I'm left with one option." Tsunade sighed and prepared for the firestorm that was destined to be the response. "The only one here qualified to take care of Naruto is Kiba." What? Why me? Came a shout from Hokage Tower, so loud that the very faces of the past Hokages trembled on their stone mountain. "Because I said so, damn it!" sounded a bellow completely dwarfing the previous scream. Kiba stood in front of the Hokage, his blood boiling and his eyes glaring death to the respected leader. "Hokage-sama, you honestly can't expect me to take that idiot home with me. My mom and sister would have an even bigger fit than Hinata's father. The whole pack would try to tear him apart." Kiba yelled with rage in his tone. Tsunade glared with such an intensity it caused Kiba's glare to falter slightly, and Tsunade found her opening. "You can understand Naruto, and so can the rest of your family. I doubt your sister and your mother combined could do something the scale of Hiashi. Your pack of nin dogs will just have to deal with it. Besides, Akamaru isn't whining now, is he?" Tsunade said with a confident smirk. Kiba looked back to his companion to find that he indeed had no problem with the situation. In fact, he seemed to be smiling. But, just give him to Hinata. She even volunteered. Kiba yelled with a twitch in his eye. Hinata blushed deeply, remembering what she had said. "Hell, give the damn fox to Shino. Just not me." Kiba finished taking deep breaths to get oxygen back into his lungs. Tsunade was about to defend her position, but suddenly the doors swung open and a golden fox strutted in, growling and yipping up a storm. "See, even he's agreeing. He'd gladly go with Hinata rather than me," Kiba said, translating the yipping into human language. Hinata turned an even darker red and had to begin mentally calming herself down lest she faint like she did when she had seen Naruto again after his 2.5-year leave. Tsunade twitched angrily a few times and was on the edge of using her demonic strength until a large and angry buzzing noise drowned everything out except its own tremendous vibrations. Everyone quieted and turned toward the source, Shino. Shino stood, his bugs out in a swarm and making as much angry noise as possible. In a flash they had receded back into Shino and all was quiet once more. Stop arguing like little children and get to a resolution, Shino said with such anger in his normally silenced voice that all involved in the argument slightly hung their heads, some more than others. Hokage-sama, it's very well known that you're a gambling person, so let's say that the responsibilities of Naruto fall on a simple game of Jankenpo, Shino offered, and suddenly Naruto produced the best grin a kitsune can. With a few short yips and the rules defined, the game was on. Ready Hokage-sama, cause you're about to lose badly, Kiba said as he readied his hand. I've been at this more than you, boy, let's go, Tsunade said as she readied her hand. Jan. Ken. P.O. was the chorus produced by the two gamblers. One betting to keep one truly annoying house guest away from his home and the other looking for only the best for the annoying house guest. As they returned to their senses, Kiba realized he had confidently thrown down his fist while Tsunade, the legendary sucker, had successfully thrown down her flat palm. I lost. She won. Kiba muttered in disbelief as he stared at his fist. Tsunade smirked with a superior air to her and she sat back down in her chair. So it's decided. Naruto lives with Kiba until he either A. resumes his human-like form or B. talks in normal human language. Tsunade smirked as she watched three ninja walk out of her office leaving Naruto and Kiba. I lost. Kiba whispered to himself. Naruto simply growled and followed the group out, yipping some things that would have earned him a good solid punch had Kiba translated them. She won, Kiba said, shaking slightly and staring at his hand. Tsunade rolled her eyes and said, Kiba, get over it. You have a fox in your house now, wrap your mind around that rather than your loss. Kiba turned and began his way out, his mind still stuck on the fact that he had lost. Suddenly the four that had left came rushing back in and hastily slammed the doors closed. Hokage-sama, we have a problem, Shino said as bugs flowed out of him to hold the massive doors closed. Tsunade blinked and stood, walking from her chair to the balcony. She swiftly opened the latch on the glass doors and opened them wide, being greeted by the loud yells of the townsfolk. Kill the fox! Kill the fox! Kill the fox! Was the unanimous earth-shaking chant as the mob swarmed the base of Hokage Tower. Tsunade stared momentarily at the group, then turned back into her office, striding up to her chair and plopping down with her head in her hands. Oh damn it, she muttered as the group before her sat waiting for her commands. By now Kiba has snapped out of his stupor and heard the chants and calls for Naruto's demise. You aren't actually going to give in to them, are you? Kiba asked, resembling a Naruto-level question. Tsunade glanced at Kiba with a raised eyebrow before turning her attention to the whole group. Okay, this is what is going to have to happen. Kill the fox. Kill the fox. The fox is dead, chanted the furious mob as they began to claw their way into Hokage Tower. That was until the Hokage herself stepped out on the balcony. Look, it's the Hokage! Rang a shout from the crowd, and in an instant the people stopped their charging of the Hokage Tower in favor of pleading their case to the Hokage. We can't let him live, was one excuse. He'll trick us and kill us all. You have to kill him, Hokage-sama, was one that nearly made Tsunade snap. With a brief head gesture, the Anbu rose from their observational posts and took to crowd control, ordering everyone to be silent so the Hokage could say her piece. Once silence reigned supreme, Tsunade began with mixed emotions. As you well know, when I took office I swore on my life that I would protect Konoha with my life if necessary, and that I would take the life of anything that threatened the people here. At this came a rousing cheer until it was silenced by the Anbu. Once it was quiet, Tsunade continued. Earlier this morning 3 ninjas, a ninja dog, and a golden fox entered my office pleading protection for the kitsune. This caused many of the crowd to boo in disgust, but they were silenced, and Tsunade continued. I allowed the fox to tell me its story, and I find Tsunade paused watching as the crowd hung on the edge of their seats in anticipation, most likely for the announcement of the death of the golden kitsune. I find the fox has done nothing that warrants its death and it is hereby granted protection by the office of Hokage, Tsunade said, ignoring the boos and hisses of the crowd along with the occasional, "How could you do this? I hereby decree that if anyone is found hitting, threatening, or in any way harassing or harming said fox, they will be dealt with by AMV members. This is my word and it stands as final." Tsunade then turned and headed into her office as the screaming and yelling behind her grew to a fevered pitch with their disappointment of the Hokage. Tsunade sat in her chair, reaching under her table and letting her fingertips graze over the bottle of emergency sake she kept at all times, with the thought that the second the group left it would be drained without so much as a blink. Everyone was tense as they sat in the Hokage's office, all of them on guard just in case the mob attempted to break the Anbu line holding them away from Hokage Tower. Sure, they would stop a few of them, but if everyone attacked in force, they couldn't be accountable for what might happen. Luckily, the mob was slowly dispersed with the help of the Anbu and a few choice Junin. When all was said and done, the group of 5 sat outside of Hokage Tower, all waiting to take their different paths home after such a horrific morning. As they said their parting words, the sun had just barely began its journey across the sky. Kiba sighed and said, "I'm going home and crashing for the night, day." Hokage-sama said, "We had a few days off just for this morning, right?" "Yes, I must get home and tend to my insect collection. Good day," Shino said before walking off into the city. I have tea to go to. Father, is G going to be furious?" Hinata said quietly as she shuffled her feet a bit. "Yeah, I'm just going to love explaining to mom and sis why we have a golden fox for a new pack member, especially since it's Naruto. I swear I'm going to be killed," Kiba said as he turned with a wave and began walking with Akamaru by his side. Later, Hinata. That just left Naruto looking up at Hinata with his ocean blue emotional eyes. Hinata looked down at Naruto and as she did, a faint blush grew on her cheeks, but she was able to hold it at bay long enough to bow and say, "I'll see you later, Naruto K-kun." She then looked at Naruto with her pearl-like eyes and a light smile on her lips. Naruto looked into the girl's pale eyes and her cutely blushing face and suddenly felt as if the fur on his face caught fire. He quickly shook it off and resolved to get a good night's sleep. He smiled the best a fox can and looked at Hinata with a look clearly expressing his gratitude. He swiftly turned and followed Kiba and Akamaru to his new home. Hinata smiled and walked home with a slight skip in her step. She wasn't sure, but she was a little more than certain that behind the look of thankfulness in his eyes, there rested something more. Kiba looked to his side to see Naruto walking beside him, his fox body giving a light bounce every second step he took. He rolled his eyes and muttered to himself, "You better be worth the damn trouble. Hinata would kill me if something were to happen to you. Mom, sis, I'm home," along with a trailing rat. Kiba muttered the last part as he entered his home, followed by Akamaru and Naruto with a slight scowl on his fox lips. "Kiba, you missed breakfast, where were?" At this point Kiba's mom had entered the scene and upon seeing the golden fox with her son and his dog she was greatly confused. "What is that?" Kiba brushed his hand through his hair and said, This is Naruto, mom." Kiba's mom stood in shock for a few minutes until her dog companion Kuromaru walked in with a yawn. Upon seeing the golden fox and his partner's reaction to it, he said, "What's with the gawking, Sum? It's just a fox, we in the pack see them all day." This fox is Naruto," Sum said, the hair on the back of her neck standing on end. Kuromaru suddenly went on guard with adrenaline pumping in his veins and growled menacingly at Naruto. "Leave this home if you wish to live, runt," Kuromaru growled, but Naruto, having faced much worse, just rolled his eyes. In a series of yips and barks he said, "Oh, how I wish I could, but there are a few things stopping me." At this Kiba began his explanation at what had happened, how he had found out about Naruto's demon and, as much as it pained him, how they were expected to keep Naruto in their home. No matter how much she hated it, no matter how much it irked him, both Sume and Kiba had to accept Naruto in their home. After a brief showing around the grounds, Kiba and Akamaru left to get some rest. Naruto was free for the remainder of the day. Naruto took this time to try and catch up on his own rest, but no matter how hard he tried, the smell of dog and the overwhelming feeling of being watched all the time made him lose his fatigue. Gods, what is there to do at this time of day? Naruto questioned no one in particular as he wandered the vast yards of the Inuzuka home. You could start by leaving and never coming back, came two voices from the darkness of the bushes. Naruto turned just in time to see two large whirlwinds of claws and fangs heading straight for him. Naruto's instincts kicked in and he swiftly jumped to the side, narrowly avoiding the whirlwinds. The whirlwinds proceeded to die down and stop entirely, revealing two ferocious-looking dogs, both of them having a deep, almost bluish-colored fur. Naruto blinked confused and said, who the hell are you? The two blue dogs stood tall and proud and said, we are the Oromaru twins and we will drive you off these lands, you demon fox. Both twins readied themselves, and when they were ready they called out, Yatsuga. They began their attack with a sprint, then they leapt up into the air, spinning into two devastating whirlwinds. Naruto this time just barely avoided the attacks. They were so close that his fur closest to them was singed. The whirlwinds that were the Oromaru twins ceased and they took a moment to find their bearings. They reassembled the landscape after their vicious spin and quickly came to realize, the fox had gone. Where is he? Asked one twin as he looked around and took in the air, hoping to catch onto the fox's scent. This way, said the other, catching Naruto's scent and rushing towards the felling fox. Naruto hid in the deep brush surrounding the Inuzuka home in hopes of escaping those insane blue dogs. What did I ever do to them? He thought loudly. Kid, now's the time for a brief lesson on kitsunes, came Kyuubi's almost welcomed voice. Hurry up, you damn fox. Naruto thought as Kyuubi sighed and began his explanation. Kitsunes are revered the world over for their image-making abilities. A genjutsu kid, Kyuubi spoke with what one could interpret it as a smirk. Genjutsu? I don't have hands to make seals. Naruto thought loudly. Before Kyuubi could respond, Naruto felt a very foreboding presence and he leapt clear from the hedges just in time to miss the Oromaru twins' Gatsuga attack. Can't you just leave me alone? Naruto asked in desperation as he tried to stall time for Kyuubi to explain this genjutsu. We have no mercy for demon foxes, said the twins in harmony as they began another attack. Naruto sighed and stood his ground, expecting everything except what happened. From out of nowhere came another, even bigger whirlwind, met the two whirlwinds head on and stopped them in their tracks. Naruto watched as the twin whirlwinds faltered and spun out of control from the power of the single larger one. They landed some ways away, both twins having their brains scrambled from spinning too long and losing control. As the single giant whirlwind came to a stop, it revealed a female dog, her fur the same brilliant white with brown splotches as Akamaru's fur. Her brown patches were over her left eye, her front legs, and the back of her tail. The only thing out of place on her was a single spot in the center of her head that was what seemed to be green in shade. She sighed, then smiled at Naruto in a friendly gesture. Sorry about those two, she said with a sheepish glance to the side, they've always been trouble. Naruto sighed and plopped down on his stomach while saying, thank you, you don't know what you have just done for me. The female dog laughed in a way that only a dog could and approached Naruto. What saved your life? Naruto nodded. Yeah, thanks a lot. It's no problem. My name is Midori, said the female as she walked over and greeted Naruto like every other animal, sniffing. Whoa, Naruto said as he jumped up and backed away, slowly scooting on his tails to cover his rear. Oh, sorry, didn't know you were so sensitive, Midori said with a slightly suggestive tone. Naruto stared blankly for a few moments before saying, anyway, my name is Naruto. Thank you for saving me. It's really no problem, Naruto-kun, Midori said as she sauntered up to Naruto and rubbed against him as she passed him only to circle around and sit eerily close to him. So what are you here for? Midori questioned innocently. Naruto blinked a few times but managed to get out, I just moved in. Hokage's orders. I guess we'll be having plenty of encounters, right, Naruto-kun? Midori asked as she rubbed her cheek against Naruto's. Yeah, sure. I have to go now. With that, Naruto sped off faster than he ever thought possible, leaving behind a very confused Midori. True to his word, Kyuubi began to teach Naruto how to work his body and what it could really stand up to. However, Kyuubi found that teaching Naruto during the day was a great risk to the boy's health due to the almost constant challenges from the dogs of the home. Most of the time they were fended off by Midori, much to Naruto's dismay, but sometimes he had to run for his life. Kyuubi had found a way to teach Naruto that would still allow the boy to have a normal sleep schedule. Naruto would spend his days avoiding the dogs and the miscellaneous villagers who were out for his blood, and at night Kyuubi would teach him through his dreams. Kyuubi first taught Naruto a few things about kitsune illusions and how to perform them without seals. Naruto picked it up as quickly as he did everything else, and soon he found hiding in an illusion came naturally to him as expected in the body of Kyuubi. He even used the illusion to meld with a tree so well that he nearly gave Kiba a heart attack when he disappeared for a whole day. Moving on, Naruto was also told by Kyuubi to find that lazy smart and hopefully get something from him in the art of improving the mind, because he could only teach so much to the boy. That is where we join Naruto, Kiba, and Akamaru on their way to find that lazy smart. How hard can it be to find Shikamaru? Look for a shogi board and there he is, Naruto yipped in frustration. They had just spent the last few hours looking for Shikamaru, but the lazy Chunin seemed to have disappeared off the face of the earth. Kiba sighed and said, Naruto, I hate to break this to ya, but I have a mission today, so I have to get going soon. That leaves you without protection, and for all we know that's what the villagers are waiting for. In reality, the past few days keeping Naruto in his home hadn't been as bad as he thought. Even his sister and mother had been convinced that Naruto was just painted in a bad light by everyone. That doesn't mean that they wanted him to stay, that just meant they could stand him. However, Kiba was a bit concerned. He saw how the villagers' glares at Naruto had grown worse and more open, and how he hated lying to his friends, save for Shino and Hinata, where Naruto was. Tsunade had come up with the excuse that Naruto had left on a long-term mission with Jiraiya and his return time was unknown. Many found it suspicious, but they figured that was Naruto for you. Kiba, however, was convinced that this fox that he had taken home was in some serious trouble if he was left alone. Then again, in the past when Kiba had to leave, Naruto turned and went home without so much as an argument. You go ahead on your mission, I got this covered, Naruto yipped as he sped up his pace, expecting Kiba to just drop off and go on his mission. No, Kiba said as he reached down and grabbed Naruto with the scruff of his neck, you're going home and that's that. We can't risk you getting your little fox head sliced off, no matter how empty it is. Naruto sighed and turned his head to look at Kiba out of the corner of his eye. Sorry Kiba, but I can't have you stopping me. With that and a puff of smoke, Naruto turned into a log and somewhere a small kitsune disappeared into the village. Oh shit, Kiba said to himself as he went searching for the golden fox. Naruto raced through the town square, eliciting plenty of screams of terror and death threats, but at that point he didn't care. He needed to find Shikamaru ASAP. He paused for a brief moment to check his search route when he heard something very familiar. Excuse me. Hinata. Naruto thought as he headed right for the sound of the stuttering shy girl. He hopped and ran as fast as he could toward her timid voice and welcoming arms. He smiled as he laid eyes on her exiting an herbal medicine shop, and he put himself into high gear just to get to her faster. However, unlucky for him, a hand reached down from the sky and plucked him from the ground by his tails and neck. You bastard fox, growled the burly man as he gripped Naruto's throat tighter to keep him from yipping out an emergency to Hinata or anyone around. You not only come back to kill us all but you want to start with the Hyuga heiress. I'll put your head on a mount, growled the man as he began to squeeze harder. Naruto's breaths came in short gasps and they quickly ceased altogether when the man began to crush his windpipe. His vision was getting blurry and he was beginning to feel lightheaded. This was surely the end. Suddenly the man went limp, dropping Naruto and falling backwards in a heap. Naruto landed on the body of the man to cushion his own fall. Shaking the cobwebs from his brain and taking in deep gasps of air, he looked to his savior only to see the mont's single visible black eye engrossed in a book with a big red "No" sign on the back. Naruto, you should learn to be more careful, came the mont's smooth voice as his eye crinkled up, the only indication he was smiling under that mask of his. Naruto grinned up at the one and only Hatake Kakashi. Now I know you can't talk, so I'll say what I have to and be on my way. Got a road of life to get lost on, Kakashi said as he began with what happened after Naruto had disappeared. Apparently Sakura had taken it a bit hard, but like with everything in life she could deal with it. Jiraiya had been confused that his seal was broken but figured if the kid had the fox demon by the balls the situation was under control. Kakashi had been worried himself for Naruto's welfare but dealt with it like he always had, read his Ika Ika paradise while giggling to himself. Okay, now that you're caught up, the Hyuga girl just got down the street. That was who you were after, right? Kakashi said with a slightly sly tone, only causing Naruto to look away with a slight blush under his fur and grimace on his lips. Well, go improve that mind or whatever. Later, Naruto. With those final words, Kakashi had disappeared in a puff of smoke, leaving Naruto to chase after Hinata. After some searching and leaping past screaming people, Naruto successfully made it to Hinata, who responded to his presence by blushing and stuttering out a good morning. Naruto responded in his now usual way, looking at her with a foxish smile, thinking why when she smiled at him it made him feel weird, then filing it away with eating something expired. Good morning N Naruto-kun. What or why you doing in the village tea today? Hinata asked politely as Naruto thought. How to tell her I'm looking for Shikamaru? Naruto thought until he came up with an idea. He used one of his three tails and quickly drew the word, troublesome, in the loose dirt of the ground. Hinata was confused for a few moments until it rung a few bells in her head. Oh, Shikamaru? She asked and Naruto nodded with a relieved smile. I'll help Naruto-kun, Hinata said, amazingly getting through one sentence without a stutter. Hinata walked alongside Naruto as they searched the town for Shikamaru, but it didn't help that Hinata had her mind on other things. She kept thinking that she would rather have Naruto. He must hate it in that house, with all the dogs trying to bite his head off. She thought, he'd be treated at least a little better at the Hyuga compound. I even have the perfect collar for him. After some thought on Naruto's half, he led her from the crowded streets of Konoha to the foothills that resided near the training areas of the village. Now where is he? Naruto thought, if he's anywhere he has to be around here. As if on cue, Naruto spotted a dark spot on the horizon walking toward them. This shadowed person walked in the same lazy and bored way that let Naruto pick him out of a crowd of 3 million. Shikamaru. Naruto thought as he headed for the lazy ninja, leaving Hinata to catch up. Shikamaru looked up to see a golden fox and the Hyuga heiress heading his way, and his only thought was, how troublesome. Naruto pranced up to Shikamaru and began yipping his head off, forgetting that no one could understand him. Shikamaru stared at the fox with a completely unreadable look on his face. Naruto, will you please shut up? Shikamaru said, which caused both Naruto and Hinata to freeze. Yeah, I know it's you for 2 reasons. 1, this 200+ IQ isn't for show, and 2, Shikamaru paused as he looked up to the clouds with a bored expression, the Hokage wants me to help you, so here are some scrolls you'll want to get. After getting over the initial shock of having Shikamaru already know, Hinata took down notes of what Shikamaru said. Remember Naruto, You have to be in tune with your body, mind, and soul to achieve anything. At least that's what the theory is. Now go away. Before your troublesome interruption, I was having a very nice day, Shikamaru said, shooing the two away so he could look at his clouds. After getting the necessary items, Hinata walked Naruto to Kiba's house just in time to get Naruto's head thoroughly chewed off by both Kiba and Sume. After being screamed at to no end, Naruto bid farewell to Hinata and took his scrolls to his and Kiba's room to study. 2 weeks later, after dark, when everyone's asleep, Naruto sat in the darkened hallway of the seal with Kyuubi sitting directly in front of him, their eyes locked on each other and not moving. Kyuubi smirked and raised his third tail, taking a small shogi piece and moving it just right. Your move, kid. Naruto stared at the board with what would seem to others as a blank look, but by now Kyuubi knew it was a look of planning. The boy had improved over the 2 weeks he had been training in his mind. To be truthful, he had never expected the boy to catch on so quick, but then again he should have expected it since the boy did master the Rasengan in an unholy amount of time. It also helped that the boy had a sort of motivation from a certain person who visited whenever she wasn't on a mission. Naruto had resolved to himself, in what he thought was private, that he would gain 5 tails just so he could walk around with her in public without drawing too much attention. Kyuubi found it admirable in some aspects and dumb in others, but he thought as long as the kid got his tails, that's all that mattered. Kyuubi figured even if this kid only got 5 tails, no one was going to be able to stop him. Just think if he got 9. Naruto slowly raised his tail and made a quick move. When that had happened, Kyuubi knew the game was his. Oh well, the boy tried. Kyuubi made his move, but at the last second saw something he had not expected. Naruto had just lured Kyuubi into a trap. Naruto grinned and began carrying out his plan. Kyuubi smirked. Yeah, this kid's a miracle. Kid, do you remember the last lesson from your scroll of Zen? Kyuubi asked as he made a move to stop the boy's assault. Yes, Kyuubi-sensei. It was, the whole moon and the entire sky are reflected in one dewdrop on the grass, Naruto said, moving his piece to run interception. Kyuubi glowed a bit at the thought of him being a teacher, but digressed and moved his piece, spelling the end for the boy. And the meaning was? Kyuubi asked with a confident smirk. Naruto tilted his head to the side and moved his overlooked piece, completely toppling Kyuubi's offense and assuring him the game. Something with such incredible insignificance often holds the greatest value, Naruto said with a smile as Kyuubi stared at the shogi board in disbelief. All because of one piece he had lost the game. Kyuubi took a few moments, but then he softly began to chuckle. This chuckling grew in his throat, and in moments he was letting out a loud, hearty laugh. Ah, kid, you're on your way, Kyuubi said as he calmed his laughter. Thank you, Kyuubi-sensei. Can you teach me some jutsu now? Naruto asked, eager to learn jutsu from the Eon's old demon. Kyuubi couldn't help but laugh and say, sure, tonight I'm going to teach you something that is absolutely necessary for you to be the king of the kitsune. Kyuubi paused, watching Naruto sit on the edge of his fox butt. You're going to learn fire. On the very edge of Konoha stood 2 figures, their dark cloaks hiding them from prying eyes as they walked along the city walls looking for their way in. They both wore wide-brimmed hats and large black cloaks with red clouds embroidered on them. The taller one of them had strapped to their back a large, mostly flat creation that was held in place by bandages that completely covered the item. The shorter of the two kept his hands deep in his pockets, but if one were to see his hands they would be fidgeting, and they were right to do so. They had heard some odd information coming from this place, they just had to check it out. Itachi, you sure that story's true? I mean, the kid can't just turn into the fox, right? The larger of the two asked in a rough voice, but he received no answer. Soon 9 tails. Itachi thought as he found the hole in the wall's defenses and used it to its fullest. Soon the Akatsuki will take hold of you. For the next few days after learning the secret to his kitsune fire abilities, Naruto spent it at the training fields hidden far behind the Inuzuka household, practicing and perfecting his own technique to use. He had still kept up with his scroll studies and his evening lessons with Kyuubi, but now his mind was more focused on the goal ahead. When they weren't on missions and had a few hours of free time, Kiba and Akamaru accompanied Naruto to the grounds to help him train his abilities. This also allowed them to teach him a few Inuzuka clan techniques since he was living with them. They had to teach in secret, but they found that, just like with him and his studies with Kyuubi, Naruto picked up incredibly quickly. When Kiba and Akamaru had to leave, Naruto would continue his training, but with no one to spar with, he had grown increasingly bored. The logs would just fall apart as if they were made of balsa wood rather than heavy oak. The only other thing he could work on was his speed, but with Kyuubi's body that was more than easy. On the 5th day of his self-induced training, Naruto took some time off to rest. He lazily walked along the training fields of Konoha, knowing that going anywhere near the village was an untimely death waiting to happen. Little did he know what he was doing just now might warrant him the exact same fate. Naruto yawned and looked for a place to rest, and that's when he suddenly noticed it. He smiled with a little nostalgia to himself as he wandered into the training fields of his old team, Team 7. He sighed as he looked at the 3 poles, long ago replaced, but the spots in which they stood held more significance than anything before. This was where they had passed the Bell's test. This was where they had first become a team. This is where they met before missions while waiting hours on end for that lazy pervert to show up. This is where he ran to just before the Chunin exams. This was where she found him and gave him the little confidence she had so he could continue on. He smiled to himself and sighed in a fox way as he walked to the poles, running his paw over one of them in remembrance. Naruto-kun, came a shy and stuttering voice from behind him that he could tell in an instant that it was the girl that he had just been thinking about. He turned his fox head to see the pale-eyed girl looking at him, then to the training poles. Naruto scooted a few inches over and patted the ground next to him with one of his tails as an invitation for Hinata to sit, which she obviously accepted. She walked over and quietly sat next to him as he looked up to her with a questioning gaze. She caught his gaze and began quietly, I was just. She took a side glance at Naruto, who was in rapt attention to her, which caused her to blush, but she gulped down her nervousness and continued with, the clan has been upset with me ever since I lost to my sister. Sometimes I can't handle their stares so I come here to think. Naruto saw the deep look of sadness in her pale eyes and did what came to his instinct. He wrapped his tails around her in a comforting embrace. Hinata's eyes immediately switched from sadness to pure shock, so much so that she nearly fainted but held her head together, slowly getting used to Naruto's warm tails wrapped around her. She could smell his scent perforating from the furry appendages. It smelled like the deep forest with a hint of ramen. She sighed with a serene look on her face and began to pet Naruto's tails absent-mindedly, sending the fox boy deeper into the state of comfort that he had entered the moment he surrounded Hinata with his tails. Naruto, with his enhanced nose, could pick up Hinata's scent easily, and to him it smelled wonderful. It was a light scent of lilacs with a small hint of something he couldn't quite place, but nonetheless it led him into an incredibly relaxed state. Ah, how sweet, Fox Demon and his girl sharing a moment. So sorry to break it up, but the fox is coming with us, came a gruff voice that broke both Naruto and Hinata from their dazes. They reluctantly broke apart and stood up in a flash, facing the last 2 people Naruto wanted to see right now. The 2 that faced them now were none other than Uchiha Itachi and Hoshigaki Kisame of the Akatsuki. Naruto growled loudly as he locked eyes with infamous Sharingan of Itachi, but at this moment Itachi found it a waste of his energy to use any jutsu, so he motioned for Kisame. Kisame looked down at Itachi, who muttered only one thing, he's all yours. At this, Kisame grinned with demonic intent and drew his blade, Samahata, into the fray. Hear that, kid? It's you against me. Kisame paused as he took a few practice swings with his blade, tried to make this interesting. Okay. Hinata was in shock at what was happening. Here were 2 S-ranked criminals after her Naruto. She couldn't let this drop. No way in hell. No matter how shy she was, there is a point where she'll get defensive. However, before she could leap into action with her Byakugan and Juken style, Naruto's tail encircled her waist and gently pushed her away, silently telling her to run. She looked down at Naruto, who made a simple head gesture to leave, then sprung into battle, leaving her torn between running and staying to help. Kisame laughed and said, "Ah, this is going to be fun after all. A golden fuzz ball protecting what's his. Kinda brings a tear to your eye, not?" Kisame launched at Naruto, his sword raised for a powerful strike. Hinata's eyes widened in fear while her cheeks burned with a blush from what Kisame had said. Kisame brought his blade down on where Naruto should have been, only to see the ground beneath his blade but no bloody fox. Where is that demon? Kisame wondered out loud as he pulled his sword from the ground, causing the bandages that were attached to the blade to rip, revealing the blade in all its gory glory. Hinata gasped as Kisame's sword was ripped from its bandages and it showed its true nature, but that was nothing compared to what was darting from the forest to Kisame's back. Kisame smirked and raised his sword to block the claw attack Naruto attempted from his back. "Nice try, Fox, but I'm stronger," Kisame said as he held his sword against Naruto's claws. Naruto growled angrily, and with a powerful blast Kisame's sword was thrown far away, the remaining bandages on it ablaze with dark red flames. Kisame backed up a few paces in surprise, allowing Naruto to find an opening. He darted faster than the wind and shoulder tackled Kisame in the stomach, letting off another blast of his fox flames at just the right moment to send Kisame skidding backwards along the ground, most of his Akatsuki cloak burned to a crisp. Kisame stumbled back a bit, then turned to the side, narrowly avoiding another tackle explosion by Naruto. Kisame grabbed the scruff of Naruto's neck midair and spun him quickly, sending him flying across the ground. Naruto skidded to a stop, then turned to face the shark man with killing intent in his fox-like cerulean eyes. Kisame held still for a few moments, the shadows of the day casting their darkness over his face. He raised his head to reveal a sick smile on his shark-like face and a murderous glint in his eyes. He let loose a haunting laugh and screamed to the heavens, "Finally! A challenge!" He grabbed the remaining pieces of his cloak and threw his arms out from his sides, revealing the sleeveless flak armor he wore under his cloak. With a sick laugh he clasped his hands together in preparation. Kisame began a series of quick hand seals and finished as he plunged his hand into the ground with the cry of, "Suiten, Kaiusui." Suddenly the earth began to tremble and Kisame removed his hand from the hole he had created, only to reveal a gushing geyser of clear water. In no time the geyser had filled the training field in a deep level of water, causing all who were in the area to channel chakra into their feet to stay afloat. "Crap, this isn't good," Naruto thought as he channeled chakra into his paws. "Ya think, kid. This body is fire-based, so in other words, water equals bad." Kyuubi screamed in Naruto's mind, completely missing the hand seals Kisame had created. "Suiten. Suiryudan no jutsu." Kisame called as a massive dragon made of water rose from his summoned water supply. Naruto's eyes burst open and he began taking defensive measures to avoid the massive dragon now chasing him. Kisame smirked and made a new set of hand seals, screaming out, "Suiten, Sukiodan no jutsu." This only increased the problems for Naruto, as while he was running from the massive dragon of water, powerful blasts of water began to cut him off. "Shit," Naruto thought as he dodged the blasts and the dragon with great effort and difficulty. Itachi noted Naruto's speed and concluded, the water blasts and dragon weren't going to be able to catch Naruto, so he devised a plan nothing short of a cliché evil genius. "Kisame," Itachi said with an evil glint in his eyes. "What is it, Itachi? I'm busy," Kisame said, keeping track of Naruto and timing his water blasts appropriately. "Water prison," Itachi said as he disappeared in a puff of smoke. Kisame grinned, forming the necessary hand seals and gathering the water. Hinata hid behind the training logs the best she could, so it was possible for her to see the fight and hide at the same time. In a flash her ninja reflexes kicked in and she went for a Juken back-handed Tenketsu shot. However her hand was caught by the wrist mid-air with a mocking scoff. "To think you're the heiress of the great Hyuga clan," said a mocking voice as she turned her head to face Itachi's blood-red gaze. "Kisame!" shouted a voice as through the air a small body was thrown into the battle zone. Kisame grinned his shark-like grin and raised his water prison to accept the hostage. The girl flowed into the water prison easily, then the prison closed up, leaving the girl a captive of Kisame's powers. "Hey fox!" shouted Kisame with a mocking laugh, "look what I caught on the fly." Kisame held up his water prison. Captured inside was Hinata, holding her breath to keep from drowning. Naruto looked at Kisame then back to avoiding the water blasts, but he did a double take which threw off his agility, allowing for several powerful water blasts and the water dragon to hit him head-on, sending him flying into the woods. "Hey, kid loses his head over one girl. I'm going to enjoy this," Kisame said with a smirk as one of his water clones took over holding the girl in the prison, allowing him to retrieve Samahata. Naruto lay on the tree branch, his body battered with some bones under the skin fractured. He was also soaked to the bone, but all this didn't matter in the least. The only thing he thought about at this moment was pure and simple, unimaginable revenge against the offender Kisame. Naruto rose from his spot on the tree limb with difficulty and turned to face the approaching shark man and his clone with Hinata in a prison. He will die, thought Naruto as his chakra began to spike and his brain went on pure instinct, mending his bones and injuries as if nothing had happened. Then his mind began molding raw chakra into something spectacular. Come out, wherever you are," Kisame called with a gravelly laugh. "It, he, re," came a distorted and animalistic growl from the forest. Kisame turned around just in time to block a burning whirlwind of claws and fangs with Samahata. The whirlwind deflected to the side and slowed to a stop, revealing Naruto, his fur a blazing gold and waving behind him 3 tails of solid fur and 1 of red chakra. "Oh no you don't," Kisame called as he ran at Naruto with insane speed, swiping with Samahata. Naruto simply stood there and took the hit, only to blow up in a puff of smoke. "Cage Bunshin," Kisame cried as he turned in surprise to one incredibly large and viciously spinning tornado that was heading right for his chest. He rose Samahata to block the offensive strike and succeeded seconds before the whirlwind struck him dead in his chest. Kisame smirked as he watched the whirlwind's chakra begin to be drained by Samahata, but something was amiss. As Kisame held the whirlwind at bay, he felt as if Samahata was still being repeatedly attacked. What the hell is going on? If the kid keeps attacking, his chakra will be gone in seconds, Kisame thought as he held Samahata with an iron grip. The answer to his question came when on his safe side of Samahata appeared the spinning head of Naruto, and in his mouth he held a burning blood-red and incredibly powerful Rasengan. Kisame's eyes shot open in horror as the world seemed to slow down. Samahata splintered like a piece of wood and its shark skin and teeth pieces scattered, leaving Kisame with no defense against the burning Rasengan and drilling Kitsune. Naruto slammed the Rasengan into Kisame's chest, and with the added spin from his Gatsuga he quickly burned a path through Kisame's armor, skin, lungs, heart, and out his spinal cord on the other side. As Naruto burst from Kisame's back, his fur was ablaze with fire and trailing behind his body were 4 burning tails. Ra! Rasengan! Senkuki! Naruto growled out as he skidded to a stop on the water behind Kisame, the burning Rasengan in his mouth a mere horrific memory. Kisame stood frozen, his eyes open in shock. This had been a big surprise. He turned his head to the side to look at Naruto, who glared at him with blazing blue eyes, the very edges having tints of a deep red to them. Suddenly Kisame coughed and blood poured from his mouth, staining the water below his feet blood red. His chest was no longer made of bone, muscle, and blood. It was a hollow shell with a foot-wide tapered radius hole in its center, the edges burned into cauterization. Kisame wavered momentarily, then fell face first into the waters he had brought to the surface, his body sinking beneath them along with the shattered remains of Samahata. In an instant the Kisame clone fell victim to its master's death and turned into a puddle of water, leaving the water prison unguarded, and hence Hinata was free to fall. Fortunately for her, a large muscular and furry object easily caught her on its now much larger back. Hinata lay against the warm fur and the comforting presence while she felt the world around her blurred due to the speed of their movement. She realized that she was snuggled tightly into the golden fur of Naruto as he carried her from the battle. Wait. He's carrying me, thought Hinata as she looked at the transformed Naruto. His body had easily doubled, maybe even tripled in size, his fur had gotten a little longer and more wild, and he had gained another tail. However, before she could finish her train of thought, she was grabbed by the collar of her jacket, then taken away from his comforting warmth by this evil chill holding her. Naruto, Itachi called as he held Hinata in mid-air by the back of her jacket. Naruto stopped in the middle of the bloody water and turned, his growl resonating deep in his chest. Let her go, Naruto growled out in his new animalistic voice. Itachi grinned and said, I see you've ascended to a four-tail, a very important stage in kitsune growth. I'm sorry to do this, but after seeing you kill Kisame so ruthlessly, I find I should take the same liberty with this Hyuga. It's only fair. Then I'll take care of you. Naruto was pissed, that's true, but the second he saw the look in Hinata's eyes, he was at a complete loss. Her face held disgust, not for Naruto for missing her being captured, but for herself for allowing this to happen. Today just wasn't her day. Her mind was swallowed in guilt and pain. Then as she heard Itachi's closing words, something happened. Around Hinata's eyes grew grotesquely large veins and her irises became a bit more defined. You won't touch him, Hinata muttered angrily in Itachi's grasp. Before he could taunt her, Hinata began to twist in his grip, calling out the name of her technique, Hakusho Kaden. In a wild spin, Hinata flung Itachi face first into a tree they happened to be perched on. She came out of her spin with a face clearly showing rage and, in the speed unknown to her by anyone, she began striking Itachi's back mercilessly. The traditional Juken strikes, pummeling him deeper into the wood despite its name. By the end of her attack, she jumped down from the tree to rest next to Naruto, catching her breath and recovering from the chakra expenditure from her own attacks. Itachi slowly removed himself from his impression left in the great tree trunk's wood. He slowly wavered side to side, not having expected that from the Hyuga weakling. Itachi shook the attack off the best he could, but he found it increasingly hard to stand. Damn it, he muttered to himself before he fell to a knee on the branch. Give up, Naruto growled with a smirk on his wild fox face as Hinata joined him in his triumphant grin. Not by a long shot, you just caught me off guard. I'll be back and that won't happen again. With those dark parting words, Itachi disappeared in a puff of smoke and the training grounds returned to silence. The training grounds suddenly began to shrink and both Naruto and Hinata looked down in confusion. They watched with relief as the water that had been bloodied by Kisame's death slowly began to recede back into the earth. When all the water had soaked back into the ground, the pair was left with a cord criminal, his broken sword, and each other. Hinata sighed happily as she fell down into Naruto's warm fur, and just before she fell into slumber she heard Naruto's rough but comforting growling voice say, Hinata, that was awesome. She felt a warm presence surround her and she fell into a peaceful slumber. Naruto sighed with a soft smile on his foxish face and decided he was stuck with clean-up duties. Taking great care not to wake Hinata, he gathered up the body of Hoshigaki Kisame for the Anbu and Oba-chan. He also discovered the shattered Samahata and took it in his mouth. As he walked through the town of Konoha, many gasped, some just stared, others cursed him, but Naruto ignored them all except those who dared to stray close to try and get the sleeping girl off his back. With a growling and animalistic, "Go away," they would flee like cowards. Naruto, after a long procession through the streets of Konoha, reached the Hokage's office. Completely ignoring the intern, he waltzed into the Hokage's office, dragging the body of Kisame behind him and carrying the sword Samahata in his mouth. Tsunade stared in disbelief as this giant fox creature simply barged in on one of her meetings with the body of Hoshigaki Kisame wrapped in his tails and the great sword Samahata shattered in its teeth. Naruto spit out the sword and dropped the body unceremoniously on the ground, saying in a growling hiss, "Special delivery. Oba-chan." "En Naruto," Tsunade said, causing the fox to face a shocked Tsunade, a stone-faced Hyuga Hiashi, and a surprised Shizune. Did you kill him?" Tsunade asked while she stared wide-eyed at the body on the floor. Naruto nodded and, after seeing Hiashi, he slowly shifted his tails, revealing the body of Hinata under their fur. Hiashi noticed this, and in an instant he was standing and glaring at Naruto. "Let her go, you demon fox," Hiashi said as he took a few steps toward Naruto. Naruto simply glared back and covered Hinata up again with his tails. "Not weak," spoke Naruto as he began backing away from Hiashi. "Give me my daughter back, you damn demon," Hiashi said, slowly losing his almost unbreakable cool. "Itachi." Naruto growled out with a snarl in Hiashi's direction. "She won." "Hiashi, freeze," Tsunade commanded with authority in her voice. Hiashi refused the orders of the Hokage and lunged at Naruto with his open palm. Naruto barely dodged the strike but dodged it nonetheless. "She won. Itachi. She won." Naruto growled out louder, his message just not getting through. Hiashi was just about to make another attack, but his muscles suddenly went lax and he fell to his knees. "Good shot, Shizune," Tsunade said as Shizune lowered her needle launcher filled with paralysis needles. "Now Naruto, slowly, what are you trying to say?" Tsunade asked as Hiashi scowled in anger. "Hinata. Not weak. She beat Itachi." Naruto growled out with such volumes it rattled the Hokage's windows. Nonetheless, the message had now been passed and everyone in the room except Hinata and Naruto were stunned. "You must be joking," Hiashi said in almost disbelief. Naruto shook his head and said with great difficulty, "She Kaden. Then Juken." He ran. "What about you, Naruto?" Tsunade asked with concern. "How did you kill Kisame?" Naruto grinned a bit and said, "Nu jutsu. R Rasengan. S Senkuki." Naruto turned swiftly, heading for the door to the Hokage's office, but stopping just before he passed Samahata. He bent down and plucked the biggest tooth from the shattered pieces and held it in his mouth as he walked out. "Naruto, where are you going?" Tsunade questioned as he reached the doors of the Hokage's office. "Let go of my daughter." Hiashi roared, the paralysis being slowly ebbed away by his struggles. "Take Hinata home," Naruto grumbled as he disappeared in a golden blur. Tsunade smiled to herself. Maybe those romance stories really do have a place in the field. He had better not try anything, Hiashi growled as he slowly and clumsily got to his feet. "I highly doubt he would. No matter what you think of him, Hiashi, he really is a good boy. Just a little stupid at times," Tsunade said with a smile on her lips. "As long as he comes nowhere near my daughter or my home again, I couldn't care less," Hiashi said, brushing off his clothes and getting ready to chase down a certain fox for his daughter back. "Oh, I think there might be a problem there, Hiashi," Tsunade said with a smirk, "seeing as he's staying at your mansion from now on." Naruto happily bounded rooftop to rooftop, his body seeming almost weightless even with the addition of Hinata on his back. "This is great," Naruto thought in excitement. "I feel more powerful than ever." "That's 'cause you're kid," came the response from Kyuubi deep in his subconscious. "You've probably noticed the changes already. New tail and bigger body, but the kicker to this body is that it also determines what you'll be in the future. This is your training body for your life, so to speak, kid," Kyuubi said confidently. "What do you mean, training body?" Naruto asked in complete confusion. Kyuubi sighed and said, "This body is the body on the cusp of your halfway mark. What you do, learn, and accomplish in this body determines what kind of kitsune you turn out to be. In this body I chose the path of destruction, learning about death and destroying opponents left and right. Ah, good times, that's what made me into the Nine-Tails Kid. Well, a red nine-tail to be exact. Red nine-tail? Naruto asked and Kyuubi responded with, yes, see there are different colors for every kitsune kid. I was a red nine-tails meaning a being of pure destruction. The white coats are the beings of healing and peace. The silvers are masters of creation and elements. There are a few more but I wasn't too keen on learning about them so I left those subjects alone. As far as I know only red coats can become full nine tails seeing as every silver, white, or any other coat died before they became more than 7 tails. In reality Kyuubi knew completely about the other kinds of kitsunes and what they were capable of. There was another path he knew of besides his own that assured at least 7 tails. However that path was something even he found dark and devastating, the path of a void kitsune. He had a good idea at what path Naruto was heading down and that path was one that many feared to tread. It held the greatest challenges but also the greatest potential. Kyuubi sighed to himself mentally as he cut communications with Naruto. He's on his way down a really long and painful path. Naruto easily bounded over a crowd of screaming villagers without giving it so much as a flick of his ear. However, when the girl on his back gave the slightest shuffle he paused briefly to check and make sure she was as comfortable as can be. When he saw her curled up in his tails and fur he couldn't help but smile then turn his head away quickly feeling the fire on his face fur begin again. Ah, what the hell, I haven't eaten anything expired in weeks, what is wrong with me? Naruto questioned himself only to hear snickering in the back of his mind. What the hell are you snickering at you demon fox? Questioned Naruto to his resident only getting a curt, nothing, in response. Quote. What did you just say? Hiashi growled out as he slowly turned to face the Hokage, her face holding a smirk rather than the fearful gaze he was used to. I said, Naruto will be staying with you from this point on until he can resume human form, Tsunade said leaning back in her chair. I only placed Naruto in the Inuzuka household for the simple reason that they can understand his barks and yips. However, now that he has proved that he can talk the offer your daughter extended the first time they had brought Naruto to me has been graciously accepted, Tsunade finished with a challenging grin directed toward Hiashi. You can't be serious. I will not take that demon into my home, Hiashi said, his glare enough to make a demon wet its pants. I am, you will, end of story, Tsunade said clearly not fazed by Hiashi's glare. How do you expect me to house that thing? Hiashi exploded at Tsunade. Tsunade calmly rose from her chair, her fist clenched tightly with her arm shaking. You and the rest of this damn village I swear, Tsunade muttered before she calmed her hand and walked around the desk to face Hiashi. That boy is not a thing, he is closest this village has to another 4th Hokage. Tsunade said right in Hiashi's face, I never knew one with the Byakugan could be so blind. He may have the body of a demon but if you just took the seconds to notice who he truly is and what he really does for people you would notice that he is a hero. He actually gave your daughter the confidence to fend off Uchiha Itachi. Tsunade took a deep breath to calm herself. You and the rest of this village may think him a monster but you know what the 4th wanted him viewed as. He wanted him to be the hero, to be respected for bearing such a painful burden but do you people ever get it? No, and that is something I find truly sickening, Tsunade concluded her rant with a quick turn leaving a gaping Hiashi staring at the back of her head. Hiashi remained silent for a long time until he silently bowed and left the Hokage's office with the words, Goodbye Hokage-sama. The second Hiashi left Tsunade plopped down in her chair and reached under her desk only to find her, emergency, sake missing. Oh shit, Tsunade said as she put her head in her hands, Shizune get me a bottle of sake stat. Naruto neared the end of his journey, it wasn't that much farther. There it is, whoa did they renovate or something? The place looks bigger, Naruto thought as he approached the front gates of the Hyuga mansion. Naruto slowly edged his way through the front gates, careful to not let the squealing nose wake the sleeping Hinata. He was lucky, for at this very moment the Hyuga branch house was changing guard shifts and he was able to slip under their defenses easily. From that point on, it was simply a test of how well his genjutsu held up under the gaze of the Byakugan. He passed through the halls, sniffing from room to room searching for Hinata's scent until he finally found it. The room was covered in her scent heavily and it almost caught him in its relaxing clutches, but he held steadfast with his will and resisted the temptations. He entered Hinata's room, his intention to lay the girl on her bed so she could rest after her encounter with the Akatsuki. He walked up to what he presumed to be Hinata's bed and he tried to pry her off his back with his tails. As his tails wrapped around her waist and began to pull, her hands and arms went on autopilot, wrapping around him and holding him tighter so she didn't have to leave the warm fur. Naruto attempted time and time again to pull her off his back but only succeeded in getting her to partially roll off his back and sit on the floor with her arms around him. Oh, you have to be kidding me, Naruto thought as he kept thinking. He eventually settled on lying down to think, but it turned out to be a bad idea because when he did, Hinata lay on his side and curled up in his fur again, using his tails as her own personal blanket. Naruto blinked as he saw Hinata curl into him and felt her soft body lie against his. It felt rather nice. I could get used to this. No, wait. Bad thoughts. Must punish, thought Naruto as he used one of his free tails to hit his head. Okay, think rationally. She's using you as her bed and your tails as her blanket. Ah, it's hard to think rationally with her on me like this. Bad Naruto. Naruto continued to his head as he heard a howling laughter in the back of his mind. What made this situation even worse was the fact that at that moment Hiashi entered Hinata's room. Hiashi simply stared for a few moments, seeing her daughter have a death grip on the fox and the fox hitting its own head with a free tail. Hiashi rolled this over a few times in his head before clearing his throat. The fox suddenly stopped hitting its head and it slowly turned its eyes to the Hyuga leader. Not my fault, pleaded Naruto in a quiet voice as to not wake Hinata. Hiashi put his hand on his forehead to compose himself with what he saw, and when that was done he said with the calmest tone possible, I understand. It was Naruto's turn to stare at Hiashi in disbelief. What? Questioned Naruto, which made Hiashi groan to himself. I said I understand, besides I am probably going to have to get used to this sight, Hiashi said, muttering the last part to himself, but Naruto caught it with his fox ears. What do you mean? Naruto asked softly. Hiashi sighed and with a bit of a reluctant to admit voice said, Welcome to your new temporary home. Naruto's fox face split in his typical joyous grin and bowed the best he could with only the use of his head. Thank you, Hiashi-sama. Naruto could have sworn he felt the girl lying on him give him a squeeze but shook it off as his imagination. I agreed under the terms you would do absolutely nothing to my daughter, understood, Hiashi said with a deathly serious voice and glare. Naruto looked into Hiashi's eyes with an equally serious glare and said, I, nor anything else, will hurt her. I swear. Hiashi stared into the red-edged cerulean eyes and sighed with relief. Naruto had that odd squeezing feeling around his side and the odd warmth on his face, but he shook it off like he normally did. I have the understanding that you know how to use the toilet, correct? Hiashi asked with a raised eyebrow. Naruto nodded and Hiashi continued with, Good, you eat ramen, correct? Naruto nodded with vigor and Hiashi came close to a smirk. Excellent. Our food budget won't take a sufficient hit then. Once Hinata awakens she can show you around the grounds, then you are to go to the Inuzuka household to gather your things. With that Hiashi left shaking his head and rubbing his temples, I'm going to go insane. Hinata had been resting quite easily all up until the part where Naruto had attempted to pry her off with his tails. Halfway through the struggle she was slowly jarred awake, but in her daze of only being half awake she clutched the warmth to her even tighter when it shifted to lie right next to her. She was about to resume her slumber when she heard a soft rhythmic thumping sound that caused her to stay awake. She slowly opened her eyes and looked at her surroundings to find herself in her room, lying on Naruto-kun, while he hit his head with his tail. She finally woke up fully and thought, "It's because of me, isn't it? I must not be good for him and he hates contact with me." She was about to wake up and show Naruto the way out of Hyuga Mansion, but suddenly her father entered and in a flash she pretended to sleep. She subconsciously huddled farther into Naruto to hopefully hide from her father's gaze, but knew he would be able to see her anyway. She frantically thought of ways out of this situation and she nearly began to cry, knowing that after this she would be severely punished by her father. "Welcome to your new temporary home." Those words passed over Hinata's ears, causing her to have a bit of shock and then relax. She smiled to herself and gently gave the fox she was lying on a squeeze, hoping he didn't notice. It only got better for her when she heard the proclamation of protection Naruto claimed for Hinata from anything or anyone. It made her so happy she gave Naruto another squeeze, this one knowing he felt, seeing as his body stiffened a bit but then relaxed quickly. After Hiyashi had left, Hinata decided now was as good as time as any to wake up, so she let out a big yawn and stretched. "Hinata, you awake?" Naruto asked, his voice getting less rough and broken, but it still held that animal edge to it. Hinata slowly opened her eyes to meet Naruto's red-edged azure orbs and nodded with a flushed face. Naruto smiled and asked, "Show me around." Hinata looked at Naruto in false confusion and he said with a smile, "I'm here to stay." Hinata produced a shy smile and got up from Naruto, but she didn't walk for her door. Instead she approached her dresser and opened the top drawer. Naruto was confused by her actions and did the only thing that came naturally to him, he followed her. After rummaging through the various items she had stored in there, she quickly pulled out a small normal-looking flat box. She turned with a smile on her blushing face and gave the box to Naruto, stuttering out, "Here en Naruto-kun." Naruto raised a fox eyebrow and accepted the package with one of his 4 tails. Holding it in place with one tail, he wrapped another tail over the cover and swiftly pulled it off. Lying in the box was a large and somewhat thick leather strap connected on the ends by a thick metal plate. Inscribed on the plate was the symbol for Konohagakure. Naruto looked at the strap in confusion for a few seconds until Hinata took the strap out of the box, wrapped it around Naruto's neck, then clasped the 2 metal pieces together. Naruto blinked a few times and looked around the room for a mirror. Once he found a suitable full-length mirror, he walked up to it and found that Hinata had just put a collar on his neck. He stared for a few moments until he turned his head to look at Hinata. "You've been planning on this, haven't you?" he asked with a few confused blinks. Hinata bowed with a deep blush on her face and said, "I'm sorry Naruto-kun, why you don't have to wear it if you don't want to. I just thought it would look nice. Why you need a versus village symbol, right?" Naruto smiled and nodded his head, "Yeah. I do, thank you. Hinata-chan."